plough on, won't we? I was going to say to kick off, I think most of you actually know, I think, about my new book, but for those who don't, I think it was certainly, of all the books that I've done, and I've done a lot, it was the most interesting genesis, really, much more interesting than any of the others. I'm not sure that there were very many positives coming out of COVID-19. There were certainly a hell of a lot of negatives, certainly for me, including two cancelled, maybe three now coming up, cancelled US lecture tours, and also a whole mass of other events and projects that were postponed, both large and small. But there was one aspect of my life that did benefit, I think, from the limitations. Seren, my publisher, commissioned me back in 2018 to write, to illustrate and to design a visual biography of the Garw, the valley where I live. Then, of course, Corona came along and threw everything up into the air, and the deadline was pushed forward, and we were all placed under virtual house arrest. But I suppose if you have to be stuck somewhere during a pandemic, somewhere where you're, as we were, restricted initially to a 1 or 2 mile radius from your home, the end of a dead-end valley boasting 4 lakes, waterfalls, cycle tracks, walking trails, all surrounded by beautiful hills and by the most incredible history, then the Garw Valley isn't the worst place in the world to be stuck. And if you've also been commissioned to write a book about that place, the Garw, during that time, that's obviously even better. The pandemic's restricting agenda forced me really, because it gave me a lot more time, it forced me to climb higher and to dig deeper and to discover new sites and new histories that otherwise really wouldn't have featured in the book. It would have been a much lesser book had it not been for COVID. The time and the space made me think, I think, about this land, its ecology, and most importantly, its future, which I suppose was what made the excerpt I'm going to read to you now suitable for the Gorwelion collection. The section I'm going to read is called Beyond Coal. It's not very long. Any biography of the Garw must start not with coal mining, which has become the whole of the tale, though little more than 100-year blip, less than a chronological flicker, but with its hills and with its waters. The land's best conjuring trick is its river always emptying itself but always full, snaking from countless springs before and still along the belly of the valley, taking the steeply sloping land's easiest path, never uncertain in its simple objective, serpent-like in our once and possibly future Garden of Eden. The valleys of the South Wales coalfields, separated by high passes with poor transport networks, and in the case of the dead-end Garw, no passing traffic at all, set alongside the large areas of flat ground upon which to build, has minimised the kinds of employment initiatives post-coal which see the footprints of giant factories as the only solutions. We need to be imagining a very different kind of future, laid out in human trails and bicycle tracks, in accommodation and decent places for visitors to eat and to drink, in Kevin Sinnott's art and Workman's Hall performances, and in the reopening of the railway, and all of our energy supplied from mountaintop turbines blown by our nearly always available wind. As history has made an about turn in our cul-de-sac home, we're already returning after coal to a more traditional relationship with the land. In a combination of humankind's efforts to say sorry and nature's own unstoppable reclamation scheme, greater celandine and common valerian, creeping buttercup and wood sorrel are flowering like parallels through the cracks in Garrow's ruins, suggesting something possible. And bramble, broom and common gorse, feverfew and primrose are rising up in nature's quiet fight back. Our new lakes are alive again with brown trout and frogs, with dragonflies, ducks and dippers, coots and moorhens, and the always solitary and antisocial heron. And a peregrine couple make their annual visit here in a good year, nesting confident now in a wall of quarried cliffs where stone was once cut to build miners' houses. The land has remained beaten up, of course, its flesh in places gored, but wounds heal. With the days of coal mining now as unimaginable to most of us as the ages of ice or those of the building of the ancient cairns on the surrounding hills to bury the dead. And even if, after all of our efforts, none of the most recent or dreamed of schemes for survival work out for our complex and contradictory species, well, no matter. The grass, the trees, the bushes will soon grow high through the windows of our abandoned homes and shops, rising through the floorboards of our churches, schools and workmen's halls, flourishing again where they always used to flourish. And the extremophile lichen on the rocks of the burial chambers of our Bronze Age ancestors will continue to spread like glorious radiating stains. These, in truth, were always the real survivors anyway, tolerant of heat and Arctic cold, of irradiation, pollution, and even being shot into space. So coal mining's brief century of much gentler poisonings has left little more than a mark on them. In a 1987 interview, just 2 years after the closure of the last pit in the Garrow, Margaret Thatcher complained that there was no such thing as society, just individuals and their families, ushering in a decade or more of the politics of individualism. A similar debate is now raging concerning the nature of lichens and of the myriad other formations of the fungi family. When you look closely at these ancient organisms, it's very difficult to tell if they are single creatures or a vast collective, individuals or one being grouped closely together for safety. 90% of the world's plants depend on mycorrhizal connections, linking them in a vast underground network with nearly every organism, passing carbon, water, nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and even alarm signals back and forth through their elaborate circuitries in what Richard Powers In his wonderful book, The Overstory, which if you haven't read, I'd really recommend it, Richard Powers has termed this the underground welfare state. I like that. An English botanist, David Reed, named these fine tubular structures that branch, fuse and tangle in an almost infinite filigree below our feet the wood wide web, challenging Darwinian hegemony of the survival of the fittest as the best description for the workings of the natural world, as well as Adam Smith's championing of selfish individualism in a free market. These old, new lessons are crystal clear within the smallest and the largest of things. Intensive commercial forestry practices which select and plant only what is thought to be the most profitable of trees, expelling in the process most species of bird, mammal and insect life, and ripping up much of the land's underground communication and support system, have resulted clearly in much less lucrative yields, with much more vulnerability to disease, as well as featureless, dark and silent arboreal deserts. Perhaps from lichens and trees to cities and human relationships, theirs is a more useful way to understand and to thrive within our world. Mutual aid and cooperation were essential, of course, for the people's survival in the Garrow, when intolerable forces were applied to lives and to the land during the harsh years of coal mining. The construction, equipping and running of workmen's halls and institutes and the establishment of mutual aid societies were based upon the principles that the health of the individual was more effectively guaranteed by the well-being of the whole, with no one being left behind. In this cooperation for survival model, paralleled by what we are learning about the reciprocity and even altruism of the superorganism of forest and field, the healthy paid for the sick, the working for the unemployed. And it is this spirit that is being recalled in some small ways today in our communitarian responses to the new realities of the COVID-19 pandemic, which only clearly a united co-evolutionary response will defeat, a reaction which begins perhaps to track a path towards a new future for the people of the Garrow as well as everywhere else. The coal, which brought droves of men and their families to this tiny village a little over a century ago, took 250 million years to create, while decaying trees and plants were swamped and compressed. Every 20 feet of vegetation debris producing just 1 foot of coal. It took us less than 100 years to exhaust it. But despite this, and the other alarming evidences, and in the knowledge that we have now entered the Holocene age, the 6th mass extinction period of our planet, the lichens and the rocks of the Garrow, its rich rivers, trees and hills, its birds and fish, its animals, insects and fungi will win. Always were winning, really, despite appearances. After taking their beating, it's clear that the earth is blooming again, one blade at a time, through our detritus of brick and coal and greed. And as the sun continues to rise and fall upon our Golden Valley, the only real question for us today is whether we will decide to throw our weight behind the inevitably victorious team or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Porthcawl. And we will now go on without an interval, I think, with Samantha Wynne Rhydderch. Delighted that she'd agreed to be part of this anthology, Gorwelion Shared Horizons. Her horizon stemmed from Ceredigion, Caernewydd, New Quay, where she lives. Her books have been published by Seren Books and Picador. I nearly said Parton. Of course, she's not published by Parton, although Picador had published her last 2 collections. Her first collections were from Seren Books, and it was sad to lose her, I know. Samantha will read some new work, which I think for the first time we're going to hear these poems. She'll describe herself, what they're based on, and we'd like to give these poems together a kind of a world premiere. So, diolch yn fawr am ddod. Thank you very much for coming, Samantha Wynne Rhydderch.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you, Margaret, for inviting me to read my new work here this evening. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to read alongside Phil this evening as well. Thank you. So the work that appears in this anthology this evening is a sequence of ghazals called Tree Tai Chi, which look at the impact of coastal erosion on the trees in the area that I live in, Cardigan Bay. And on my daily walks along the beach, I see trees falling down the cliff at weird angles, and they're all at slightly different stages of dying. And I find it both heartbreaking and mesmerising, really, at the same time. The increased number of storms have gnawed away at the clay, which in turn has loosened and is crumbling into the sea, taking with it the roots of the trees. And the trees don't fall quickly, but they fall at very sort of graceful angles, and sometimes slowly, so slowly that they move but without seeming to. And sometimes they look in agony, and sometimes they're just kind of clinging on. And the process reminded me of Tai Chi, where there is movement, but there's also stillness, because the moves happen so slowly. So each poem in the sequence looks at a different tree: oak, beech, larch, ash, and the way each tree seems to spell a different letter of the alphabet as it goes down. And I think that it also expresses a different emotion. So the letters I've looked at so far have been A for anger, F for fear, S for surprise, E for excitement. So the whole sequence is written in the form of a ghazal. And I started thinking about writing in ghazals because of my own name, Samantha, which is originally Persian. And I wondered what might happen to my work if I were to experiment with writing in that form. And the ghazal is older than the sonnet, so it dates back to the 7th century Arabia. It's made up of couplets, and each couplet is autonomous, but it's emotionally and thematically complete. And I love narrative poems. I love poems that have a good yarn, tell a good story, but you can't really do that with the ghazal form. because of the requirements of the form. So the first couplet sets up the refrain, which is called the radif, and then that recurs in the second line of each subsequent couplet. But there's also the preceding word called the kafia, which also rhymes. So it's more like a kind of patchwork quilt of cameo moments that build up to a larger picture. And I thought that would suit the subject matter perfectly, really, allowing me to kind of repeat and go back to the issue which is at stake here, which is the coastal erosion. One final point about the ghazal is that you have to put your name at the end of each poem. You have to sign yourself off, as it were, in the poem. So there are different versions of my name in the final line of each poem. Tree Tai Chi 1, Larch. Who could tell whether it's ascending that larch or descending the cliff? Either way, it's a shimmying larch. We're used to seeing it shake blackbirds out of its hair on windy days in March. I call it the larking larch. When the music of the rain stops, it finds itself at the edge of the field, miming a lurching larch. It spells the letter Y with its two remaining arms, without knowing why, has no understanding it'll arch. This is Tree Tai Chi Flex the Sky, but how far can you flex before you fall over, Wynne, are no longer a larch? Tree Tai Chi 2, Oak. If you're a tree, how does time pass when everything happens at such a slow pace? That an oak can be stripped of all greenery by June may be unusual, but well known in this place. Even if you're an oak that's 200 years old, you won't be able to hold on at this unholy pace. Once clay starts to crack in drought or slide in rain, it releases every root. Here, that's commonplace. How much land are we losing? It's disappearing at the rate of 1 metre a year, which is a fair old pace. What does it mean to live without ever leaving the place you were born? Ask an oak about pace. Arms raised in the shape of the letter V, carved with an L and 2 vowels in its bowed carapace. Not a joke, this was once an oak. Now it's waving goodbye to the list of who loved who in this place. So busy doing tree Tai Chi gazing at the moon, they didn't notice the tide racing towards the coppice. You may have the heart of an oak, but that won't save you from drowning, man, at your own pace. Tree Tai Chi 3, Beach. We're all agreed trees need access to water, but what beach wants to be birthed in water? Changed weather patterns can cause clay to give way. Our boundary of beaches seem to be asleep in water. This beech tree is demonstrating tree Tai Chi between heaven and earth, contorted in 3 feet of water. Fish can't see dolphins in this miso soup of branches and mud. Dolphins echolocate them, then creep up on them underwater. Murky water attracts pods of dolphins who teach their young to find fish when they're concealed by clay in the water. This tree seems half beach, half dolphin, as it prepares to backflip off the cliff edge. One leg spelling J for joy, it leaps into the water. Tree Tai Chi 4 is Apple Tree, and it's the last one in the series that's published here. So I'll finish the Tai Chi poems here, but I have got a couple more which are not the Tree Tai Chi poems. Apple Tree. There they go, staggering around our apple trees, like an orchard drunk on the fruit from its own trees. One is arthritic, magnetized by the sea's sweet nothings. Another believes erosion does not apply to apple trees. The one in the corner is flirting with the edge, whispering to the dribble of shale on the beach below its family trees. Are these petrified in the Tai Chi pose, row the boat? They must have moved, yet we never see them shift, the trees. One tree is doing a handstand, spelling the first letter of anxiety. This one's just a scribble against the sky. That's poetry. So I'll finish on a poem called Death Watch, which is also in this anthology, and it looks at the Death Watch beetle, and the poem starts with the sound that the Death Watch beetle makes. It's also a ghazal. Who is that tapping? Who's trying to get through to us 5 brothers keeping watch all night through? The call of insect morse is insistent drilling, which our dying dad has known his whole life through. The sheets that bandage his thin limbs and white-beaked head to the bed are soaked right through. He looks like old Father Time, who has stopped ticking in the 4-poster beetles have chewed through. Like aristocrats, Death Watch beetles prefer the aged oak of landed estates and warm nights in June to mate through. These rafters, already 400 years dead, were home to forest birds for 200 years straight through. The beetles' teeth chisel their way closer. Dad's dentures rattle in a glass when one of us tries to tiptoe through. This panelled room contains him like a coffin the beetles have started eating through. As his 90 years diminish to minutes, it's hard to take in this man will be a habitat for others to bite through. Given they outnumber us Rhydderchs 50 to 1, best to live alongside them the next decade through.
Thank you, Samantha Wynne Rhydderch. I would imagine that's the first time all those poems have been read together in one go. Marvellous. A kind of a world premiere. Thank you. See, the Green Room brings you lots of things. Also, the Green Room will bring you, on the 3rd of December, our third Gorwelion Shadow Riders event, which will feature myself and a very fine poet and critic, Laura Wainwright, and we will read our contribution to the book ourselves. The second event is on the 19th of this month, November, in Brecon at 1 p.m. in the Climate Cafe, the Muse Bookshop in Glamorgan Street, Brecon. And Mark and myself will speak and answer questions. Also, Chris Meredith, wonderful contributor to Gorwelion, with a great poem called Steepman Jungle, will read, and I think there will be a Q&A about why this book has been produced, as if there has to be a question about it. Remember, 9 poets, 9 writers from Wales, 5 from India, 2 from Scotland. We hope with all the events we have, either live or on Zoom or live stream, we will feature all of them by the time we finish, probably next year sometime. Thank you for coming, diolch yn fawr. And I hope you've enjoyed our first launch of this, I hope, worthwhile anthology produced for COP26, but it will be, because of the quality of his writing, it will be current horribly forever. Thank you. Can have a drink now. Thanks, Phil.
Great.